There is a moment each morning when the mind offers an argument for delay. It whispers that the work can wait, that comfort is a wiser choice, that the body deserves one more hour of useless ease. In that instant, a choice is made that will echo through the day, the week, and the years to come. To change the course of a life, it is not grand gestures that are required, but the ownership of these small, relentless decisions. This is the place where the samurai stood, and where the modern warrior must begin. At the threshold between ease and action, where discipline is forged in silence. Miyamoto Musashi, the unrivaled swordsman and author of the Book of Five Rings, wrote of rhythm, timing, and the clarity that arises when the mind is free of distraction. He taught that mastery is not an achievement but a way of being, a continuous unfolding of practice and presence. Musashi did not speak in slogans. He described the daily work of a warrior, to strip away the unnecessary, to understand one's true position, to return again and again to the essentials. In the same spirit, the samurai embraced Bushido, not as a code for spectacle, but as a practical method for shaping the self. Rectitude, courage, benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, and loyalty. Underneath these virtues lies a quieter discipline, one that organizes life around presence and purpose. Consider the life of Kenji Nakamura, a man in his mid-30s who once lived like many of us do, pulled in multiple directions, governed by default habits, and convinced that talent or inspiration would one day arrive to save him. Kenji worked a steady office job, showed up to social obligations, and spent evenings anesthetized by endless noise. He was, by all outward measures, competent. Yet inside, procrastination had become an identity. He rationalized his delays with careful logic. More research, the need for the perfect time, the fear of failing if he began too soon. Years passed. Small projects died in folders. Dreams dulled. One morning, Kenji read Musashi's line, "Do not sleep under a roof, carry no money, do not possess expensive items, and you will not be troubled." He did not interpret this literally. He understood it as a challenge to his attachment to comfort and the illusions that permitted him to avoid the necessary work of becoming. That day, he made a decision. He would test his life against a simple regimen, a set of non-negotiable acts that would reset his internal compass. This was his personal samurai reset plan, a program of elimination and strict focus intended to sever the ties of procrastination and reclaim agency over his time. The first rule Kenji adopted was elimination. Borrowing from Zen and Bushido, he began to remove the distracting elements that fed his habit of delay. He deleted dozens of apps, unsubscribed from mailing lists, and sold objects he kept out of sentiment, but never used. Each act of removal was not merely practical, it was symbolic. He learned to treat the environment as a mirror of the mind. Clutter invited hesitation. Clarity invited motion. He emptied his desk and made his living space sparse. Not ascetic for its own sake, but intentional. The mind responds to its surroundings. When there are fewer stimuli vying for attention, the decision to move becomes less costly. The second rule focused on ritualized beginnings. Musashi fought hundreds of duels and knew that there is a moment before action when the mind must be settled. Kenji created a short, uncompromising morning ritual that anchored his day. For 20 minutes, he sat in silence, attending to his breath, aligning posture, and naming the single task that would define his day. He wrote this task on a slip of paper and placed it where he could see it through the morning. He did not list multiple projects. He named the one action that, if completed, would signal the day's victory. This ritual did not require inspiration, only persistence. Over time, the simple act of naming one task became a lever that aligned his attention and allowed him to begin. The third rule was the removal of alternatives. In the training of a warrior, indecision is the enemy. Kenji learned to eliminate exit routes from commitments. If he intended to write each evening, he removed any work that might siphon off that time. He told his friends, politely but firmly, when certain hours would be unavailable. He scheduled non-negotiable blocks and treated them as if his life depended on them. In doing so, he recreated Musashi's principle of having no preoccupation with one's survival. By committing to small, absolute rules, he discovered a paradox. Freedom arrived through constraints. We must pause here and consider why these actions, elimination, ritual, and removal of alternatives, work. The human mind is designed to conserve energy and avoid risk. Delay is an efficient default. The samurai taught the opposite. Conserve your spirit by trimming the inessentials so that your energy flows where it matters. A disciplined system is a scaffolding for the will. Without structure, intention dissipates into contingency. By converting vague goals into specific practices, Kenji reshaped the environment in which his decisions occurred. He did not rely on motivation. He designed conditions in which procrastination became more difficult than action. Kenji's struggle was not merely external. For each outward tidy of his surroundings, an internal dialogue protested. Old identities are persistent. The part of him that found safety in delay called itself careful, considerate, and realistic. It feared the vulnerability of beginning, the exposure of imperfection, and the burden of public failure. To the samurai, shame and fear are not enemies to be buried, but signals to be understood. Bushido is about courage, not the absence of fear, but the disciplined response to it. Kenji began to speak differently to himself. He reframed failure as information, not apocalypse. He practiced speaking with the same stoic precision a samurai might use before battle, measured, honest, immediate. Part of his new practice involved learning to enter silence deliberately. Silence, in the Zen tradition, is not the absence of sound alone, but a cultivated state in which the mind withdraws from its habitual chatter and becomes receptive. Kenji adopted brief windows of silent work, sessions where he wrote, read, or trained without interruption. At first, this produced anxiety. His hands would tremble at the idea of no phone, no music, no escape. But every session lengthened his tolerance for discomfort. He discovered that in silence his thoughts clarified, the fog of procrastination lifted, and a precise sense of what needed to be done emerged. The transformation did not happen in a week. The samurai path instructs patience. Musashi's greatest victories came from years of practice, not the flash of a single fight. Kenji's progress was incremental and measurable in small wins. A completed chapter, a morning committed to study, a month free of habitual television. The real change occurred in the space between these wins, in the formation of a new identity. Where before he saw himself as someone who delays, he began to think of himself as someone who shows up. Identity is not an abstract truth, but a pattern of repeated, small acts. Each non-negotiable action hardened into self-definition. This is the essential lesson. Systems, not willpower, determine outcomes. Willpower is a finite resource, vulnerable to fatigue and mood. Systems, on the other hand, shape behavior before willpower is required. A samurai does not rely on heroic bursts of courage in every skirmish. He trains such that his reactions are disciplined. Kenji's daily rituals, ritualized beginnings, strict blocks of time, removal of distractions, became the invisible architecture supporting his will. He placed friction between himself and old habits and lowered friction between his intentions and action. Another crucial component of the samurai reset is the concept of presence. The samurai cultivated kokoro, a heart-mind aligned with the task at hand. Presence is not merely being physically available. It is the full inhabiting of the moment. For Kenji, presence meant that when he wrote, he was not simultaneously planning dinner, checking messages, or rehearsing fears. He allowed his awareness to tighten around the work, excluding everything else. This concentrated attention produced a quality of effort that resembled mastery more than busyness. A single, focused hour, employed with presence, yielded more than several distracted hours stretched over different tasks. Surrender is a paradox central to Zen and to samurai discipline. Surrender does not mean resignation. It means releasing the illusion of complete control. In Kenji's early attempts to reconfigure his life, he attempted to control each variable, to design a flawless plan that would guarantee success. The plan failed. The lesson was to accept uncertainty and commit to the process regardless of immediate results. Musashi advised adapting to circumstances rather than forcing them into preconceived shapes. Surrender, in practice, allowed Kenji to be responsive. When a plan faltered, he adjusted without self-judgment. This steadiness kept him from returning to the old identity of the procrastinator, who dissolves projects at the first sign of trouble. We should examine the role of small, non-negotiable actions more closely. The samurai trained with repetitive drills so that motion became automatic, reliable under stress. Kenji created his own micro-rules. Write for 30 minutes each evening, stand and breathe before decisions, and review the single daily task each night before sleep. These micro-rules were few and strict. Their purpose was not to overwhelm, but to create predictable victory points. Each micro-rule functions as a commitment device, an unglamorous yet formidable tool for moving the life needle. Over months, these small acts compounded into meaningful progress. Identity shift happens when the mind receives consistent evidence of new behavior. For Kenji, the accumulation of small wins produced an interior reallocation of belief. The man who once told himself he was not someone who finished what he started now had a ledger of completions. This ledger, private and real, was more persuasive than any pep talk. The samurai understood that reputation begins within. Honor does not derive solely from public recognition, but from the fidelity to one's own standards. When one acts in alignment with an inner code repeatedly, the world outside tends to rearrange itself, to reflect that internal order. Discipline, in the samurai sense, is not joyless austerity. It is the elegant simplicity that allows a person to direct energy toward what is essential. Kenji found that by stripping away indulgent choices, he experienced a certain liberation. With fewer petty demands on his attention, he acquired the capacity for depth. He noticed relationships improving because he had more presence to offer them. He encountered fewer surprises because his life was organized around consistent patterns, not improvisation. The freedom he sought was not found in infinite options, but in committed focus. Musashi also taught strategic thinking, a way to see beyond immediate skirmishes to the larger campaign. Kenji applied this by framing his work in terms of seasons rather than days. There are times to prepare, times to act, and times to recover. He planned quarters of concentrated effort and periods for reflection. This larger horizon prevented the oscillation between frantic bursts and dissipated languor. The samurai used strategic patience to choose battles that mattered. Similarly, Kenji began to allocate his finite energy to projects aligned with his deeper aims, refusing the seductive pull of every interesting possibility. An important discipline is the practice of honest accounting. Samurai recorded their own failures as much as their victories, not to wallow, but to learn. Kenji instituted a weekly review where he examined his adherence to his micro-rules, assessed where he slipped, and adjusted his system. This review was a sacred space for clarity, not punishment. He asked 2 questions: what worked and what required further elimination. The answers were not always comfortable, but they provided the raw material for improvement. The samurai believed in continuous refinement. Mastery is an iterative process. We must also consider the relational dimension. Bushido emphasized benevolence and respect. Kenji did not pursue his transformation in isolation. He found mentors and companions who valued discipline. He observed older colleagues who embodied steady work, and he sought their counsel. He found that the disciplined person attracts environments that reinforce discipline. Conversely, he distanced himself from relationships that rewarded distraction. This distancing was not a moral condemnation, but a practical alignment. If one wishes to cultivate presence, one must inhabit spaces that permit it. Transformation, finally, required Kenji to reconcile with loss. The samurai lived with an awareness of transience, kata, an acceptance that all things pass. When Kenji shed certain comforts or abandoned projects that no longer served him, he felt a real ache. There is sorrow in choosing a path. The road to focus demands relinquishment. Yet within that sorrow lies the possibility of clarity. Loss purifies intention. The samurai practiced in part to die daily to lesser selves so that a truer self might persist. Kenji's willingness to surrender comfortable illusions allowed him to step into a life of disciplined presence. Months became a year. The man who rose reluctantly from bed now greeted the morning with a named task and a quiet patience. He experienced setbacks, as any samurai would, but he met them with the same tools that had begun his transformation: simplicity, ritual, presence, and candid review. His work, once always lurking at the periphery of his life, became shaped and visible. He finished projects not because he was suddenly braver, but because he had designed a life where finishing was the default outcome of daily practice. There is a final, crucial point to understand. The samurai reset plan is not a fast path to productivity. It is a method for reattuning the soul to disciplined action. It asks for an acceptance of the slow accumulation of skill, the patient integration of habit, and the fortitude to live under a code of simplicity. For those tempted by turnkey solutions, the words of Musashi are instructive. You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain. The path Kenji chose was straightened by elimination and widened by ritual. It required him to live with small, honorable constraints. In return, he received a profound steadiness that allowed him to move through life with more clarity and less resistance. If you are listening now and find the old excuses lining up in your mind, notice them, as Musashi would notice an opponent's breathing. Do not engage in argument. Observe and proceed. Begin with the simplest act. Remove one persistent distraction. Declare one unbreakable morning ritual, and choose one task to anchor your day. Make the removals deliberate, the rituals brief and immovable, and the commitments few. Expect resistance. Expect days when the old identity reasserts itself. Respond with gentle, decisive action. Return to the ritual, name the task, and work in silence for a short span. In the end, the transformation the samurai sought and the one Kenji achieved are not about becoming a warrior with a sword, but about becoming a warrior of attention. The battlefield is the daily life, and the conflict is between scattered desire and disciplined intention. The practice is modest, yet its accumulation is profound. Stoic rectitude, Zen silence, Musashi's blunt clarity, all converge to teach one thing. Mastery of life is made from the repeated choice of presence over ease, of small rules over vague hope, and of honest accounting over self-deception. Walk this path without drama. Remove what distracts. Name what matters. Commit to the small, non-negotiable acts that tilt the future. Let silence refine you. Let ritual steady you. Let the slow work of repetition become your character. This is the samurai reset. Not a spectacle, but an ongoing correction, undertaken daily, that shapes a life toward strength, clarity, and service. The voice of procrastination will return, as it always does. Greet it, do not indulge it, and step forward into the quiet discipline that defines a true warrior.